Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Amani Jamal, Dean of the Princeton School of Public, Dean of the Princeton School of Policy and International Affairs, SPIA. Welcome to this virtual edition of the Dean's Leadership Series. We are so pleased to have so many of you joining us from here on campus and around the world. I'm absolutely honored today to welcome our special guest, Dr. Carla Hayden, who currently serves our nation as the 14th Librarian of Congress. Dr. Hayden was appointed by President Obama to lead the library in 2016. She is serving a 10-year term and is the first woman and the first African-American to lead our National Library. For those who aren't familiar with the history, the Library of Congress was created by President John Adams in 1800. It is now the largest library in the world with millions of books, films, videos, audio recordings, newspapers, manuscripts in its collection. It is also the main research arm for the US Congress and the home of the US Copyright Office. Interestingly enough, Dr. Hayden is one of the few persons to serve in this role who is actually a librarian by training. She began her career as a library associate and children's librarian at the Chicago Public Library. She went on to become an assistant professor for library and information science at the University of Pittsburgh, as well as the library services coordinator for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. She then served for several years as deputy commissioner and chief librarian of the Chicago Public Library. At the time of her appointment as the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Hayden was serving as CEO of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland, where she had worked for over 20 years. During her time in Baltimore, she also served for 1 year as president of the American Library Association, which is the oldest and largest library association in the world. Quite a distinction. Dr. Hayden holds a master's degree and a PhD from the Graduate Library School of the University of Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Hayden. We are so pleased to have you join us here at SPIA today.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. You covered what the library is and its history, and I appreciate it.
And we probably didn't do justice to all your accomplishments and accolades. So.
Oh, no. My mother's not listening, so it's okay.
That's wonderful. We're delighted to have you with us today. Today's conversation with Dr. Hayden will focus on how digital policy impacts diversity and access in communities. I am excited that it will be led by two of our outstanding faculty members here at SPIA, who lead our Center for Information Technology Policy. Please allow me to introduce them and then we can get started. Dr. Pratik Mittal is the interim director of the Center for Information Technology Policy, and he is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Princeton University, where he's also affiliated with the Department of Computer Science. His research is focused on solving privacy and security challenges facing our society. He also explores distinct approaches to widely used operational systems and has used the resulting insights to influence system designs and operations, including that of the Tor network, which is an open source privacy network that enables anonymous web browsing, and also the Let's Encrypt Certificate Authority, which directly impact hundreds of millions of users. Joining Pratik to guide today's conversation will be Tithi Chattopadhyay, who is the executive director of CITP. She oversees the Center's strategic planning, research collaborations, and new initiatives such as CITP's Emerging Scholars and Public Interest Technology Summer Fellowship Programs. Tithi is the former broadband director for the state of Wisconsin. She's also an economist and teaches and conducts research on the digital divide, the impact of the digital economy, and the evolving role of public institutions, including universities and libraries, as they seek to address societal challenges around technology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hayden, Dr. Mittal, and Dr. Tithi as well for what I know will be an engaging conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Tithi.
Thank you, Dean Jamal. Before I begin, I would like to let our audience know that we've broken up this conversation into two segments. In the first segment, we will focus on the work of the libraries around issues of digital inequality and digital divide. And in the second segment, Professor Pratik Mittal will have a conversation with Dr. Hayden on her thoughts on broader digital policy issues, including misinformation, privacy, and security. We will leave time at the very end for audience questions. So please feel free to post your questions for Dr. Hayden in the Q&A box at any time during the event. So welcome to Princeton, Dr. Hayden, and we're very excited that we have this opportunity to not only talk to the 14th Librarian of the Congress, but someone that has done a lot of work around modernization, digitization of libraries. And my first question for you is around this topic. When people think about libraries, people often think about these grand physical spaces with a collection of books, manuscripts, films, artifacts, and so on. The internet over the past couple of decades has changed a lot of what we imagine the libraries to be. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've seen libraries evolve because of the internet and digitization? And then can you tell us a little bit more about how the pandemic has changed it even more?
Well, thank you. It's exciting to be part of this conversation because the history of libraries, particularly in the United States, was part of an effort to promote public libraries as vehicles for public education around the 1870s. That's when public libraries in this country really became a vehicle in communities to help people get the information that they needed. And so when you think about the decades that went forward, when that vehicle of information was only the printed text in a container that we know are books, a lot of the operation of the library had to revolve around maintaining those containers, keeping up with who was taking them out. All of it was really that entity, really, that became a lot of the focus of how libraries operated. With the advances in technology, and particularly computer, that just opened up and freed the information from the container. So when you think about the role of libraries and how the information now was not just in this one format, it evolved to recordings and film and everything, but now with the computer and the internet, it was freed. However, that brought other challenges. And during the pandemic, though, what public libraries in particular faced was the fact that over time, communities had been using libraries in their communities as opportunity centers. They became definitely one of the primary points of access to the digital world. The people who didn't have computer access at home were using the libraries to fill out job applications, to do all types of things. When the pandemic hit, my colleagues, and I heard from them, and it's widely known, were very concerned because they knew with this switch to virtual learning in particular, that they, with their physical doors closed, they could not be that place for access. And so they became even more creative than they have been, using their mobile units, for instance, what people might have called a bookmobile, but it's needed, going into communities and providing the access so that people could get access connecting to the mobile units. One library got special funding so that they could put antennas and things on the top of their library so that the entire neighborhood could have free internet access. They loaned hotspots out. They did everything they could to still be that digital access for so many people. And those same types of processes and things that they developed are continuing on.
Can you, I know you've talked a little bit about access to physical infrastructure and what libraries did to sort of help during the pandemic when it came to basic broadband access. But can you tell us a little bit more about challenges that libraries faced when it came to content distribution, and how you sort of thought about sort of adequate access to content and protecting content creators as well at the same time, because there were a lot of copyright issues and things like that?
Right. The content access, one of the things that is still challenging for many public libraries in particular is the access to e-content and working with publishers and being able to loan ebooks. I mean, that's just about the simplest one. It was easier when you had that container, you purchased that book, you could circulate it until it fell apart and it was one purchase. But working with publishers on how many times you can circulate an ebook and what that is has become a challenge that the entire library community has been working on. And also being that trusted source for so many people with digital content and making sure that we can provide safe and secure access to digital content. And I think we're going to get into this a little later, that the use of the digital content is not unnecessarily used for surveillance that the person doesn't know about and things like that. So I think we're going to touch on that. But so those are the two things. How do you make sure that what the person has access to is secure and private? And what can we put on? And how can we do that with, and making sure that we are respectful, of course, of the rights of the creators. And my involvement with the administration of the copyright process has really broadened my understanding of the so many aspects that need to be considered and revised with technology and the current copyright laws. They were built at a time when the internet really didn't exist. So how do we work on that?
So moving on from access, a lot of us that work on these issues around digital inequality and digital divide realize access is only part of the issue. Adoption and utilization is another big part of the equation. And while digital natives and people with the resources have an easier time adopting the technology, can you tell us a little bit more about the role of libraries in sort of helping non-digital natives adopt this technology?
Libraries have been very active, especially with working with the different generations, and particularly seniors, and I'm now in that group, having classes for seniors, making sure that they combine it. One library put together the access to food in a food desert area with the instruction on computers, and others have used it to have it different social aspects of it as well. So they're learning together, non-threatening, even the intergenerational, having teen volunteers work with the seniors and be their guides on the side and that. So really concentrating on helping them, because that is an important part when you think about, for instance, the movement to e-government. And I got a chance to see that firsthand in Baltimore, Maryland, where I still live, when the applications for Section 8 housing, public housing, were totally online. The people who had to apply only had like 2 weeks to apply. And many of the people did not have access to high-speed type of computer that they could sit there and try to go through the thing. So they were coming to libraries, and the librarians reached out to the housing department and said, we want to be trained on the applications. We know that when this is announced, that people will be flocking to our buildings to get on, and we want to have it ready. We want to have the sample applications. They had volunteers ready to help people come in and sit there and help them navigate that. And so that entire e-government and all of the e-services that you have to apply for, think about people who are not digital natives, or they don't, all they have is just one device like this, and you're trying to fill out an application.
That actually leads me to my next question about, I would imagine that the Library of Congress has a group of like experts that can help with digitization and sort of modernization of libraries. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the Library of Congress may be working with local libraries, or any advice you have for local libraries on how they can build capacity to do this a little better, and what should we generally be thinking about in the local library space to sort of build this capacity up?
The connectivity, the Library of Congress has a digital strategy, and two parts of it. One is a digital strategy in terms of making sure that our content is discoverable. One of my colleagues has it emblazoned. If it's not discoverable, it's not accessible. So you have to make sure people can get to it. They have the metadata, they have all of the things that they need. And so the Library of Congress connects with other research libraries, reference libraries, and the public library network to be the main source, if we can, of helping with the cataloging, with the basics of accessibility, but also best practices and being part of a network. We also are very active in making sure that people are aware that there is rural digital access, and working even with legislators. One that's connected to Princeton, Representative Kilmer, about making sure that you have the broadband highway. And we forget sometimes, we concentrate on the urban areas. I mentioned the food deserts and things like that, but rural access is definitely something that needs to be improved, and that we all work together on creating this pipeline so we can get the content out there and make sure that it is accessible. So there's this strong network of working together and having internships, or having just programs where we present and work with other libraries.
Thank you for bringing up the rural-urban divide. I do acknowledge that urban areas do have an issue, but rural areas, something. I mean, I worked in Wisconsin, so we sort of had a lot of rural broadband issues.
Yes.
But I'd sort of, at this point, I'd like to maybe take a pause, and I will hand it over to Professor Mittal for the second segment. But before I do that, I'd like to remind the audience that you can still post your questions in the Q&A box at any time. So please post your questions for Dr. Hayden. We will have time at the end. But I do want to sort of shift our focus away from just digital divide and digital inequality to some of the broader policy issues. So I'm going to welcome Professor Mittal to join us right now.
Thank you, Tati, and thank you, Dr. Hayden, again for taking time for this conversation. And it's an incredible privilege to be able to have this conversation with you today. So far, our discussions with Tati and you have focused on the changing role of the library, especially in the context of the internet, in the context of the pandemic, and issues of digital access and digital adoption. Going beyond these issues, what are the broader digital policy challenges from your perspective that libraries are facing today? And how can we reimagine our digital policy to address these challenges?
In the age of misinformation, the bedrock of access for libraries is we are a trusted source. And we even had, there was one opportunity that a person in the IT field told us about and said, if you libraries would all get together, you could be your own, site in terms of almost a good housekeeping seal of, these things have been vetted. We know, because that's what in library schools, they were libraries, now they're information schools. That was one of the first things that we learned, was how to look at a source of information and look at where it's coming from, who's the author, all of this, and make judgments basically about that. So the policy of vetting and making sure that what we are putting on our sites and what we are connecting to will not be part of, let's hope, a misinformation environment, is something that I think all libraries are now really making sure that we're looking at it. Also, cybersecurity in terms of that misinformation. So that means that we have to invest heavily and in cybersecurity aspects of providing this online content. And that means also connecting with other entities that are involved. And usually it's a government entity, that we are part of those groups and we are connected to that we're not standalone, because then you're more vulnerable. So you'll see quite a few discussions about cybersecurity, making sure that we are part of the effort to not be as vulnerable. You're going to have the attacks, the threats. Library of Congress has a number of threats every day coming in and trying. So that if you're going to be that kind of trusted pipeline, you have to have your policies and what you will allow. That sometimes can mean that there are restrictions on how things are used, even staff members, the multi-factor authentication, you got 50 steps to say it's you and all of that. And there's some bristling with that. Why do you make us go through that? But these are policies that you put in place and you have to think about.
No, I'm personally delighted to hear that aspects of cybersecurity and trust in content are aspects that you're passionately thinking about, and connecting security to topics in privacy and surveillance. I would love to hear your thoughts on digital policy that you would love to put in place in terms of ensuring privacy of the library users, and privacy is intimately connected to surveillance. If
Yes.
Entities have the ability to see what we're doing, they also have the ability to censor what we are doing. And I would love to hear a perspective in terms of the role of the library in a context where we are having some conversations about knowledge and books being banned.
The privacy aspect, I was involved with, for instance, the Patriot Act when that first was developed after 9/11. And of course, libraries have always been involved with law enforcement and being part of legal investigations into the use of the library materials. I remember one case where there was a sniper and the person had checked out a book of maps from a library and had to testify at the trial that this in fact was the book and this was the person who had checked it out. But it took a lot to make sure that that aspect, it was a legal search of the records, and that you go to a court and a judge, and the government has to present some evidence that there's a reason to look at this person's records. What was of concern, and we had to work this out as a profession and work with government entities, and it's still something that has to be worked on, the surveillance part. when does the government have the right to just look at who's looking at what websites and who's doing that? And we were very concerned that there would be a misinterpretation of interest in a subject that could, just because you're interested in a subject doesn't mean you intend to do anything.
Right.
People wanted to know what was jihad. They didn't know, and there was a lot of concern. So just because you're searching, and think about your search habits and what you're doing and how you're looking at things, you're just interested. You just want to know. You're not going to maybe do anything with it. It's just that. So there's that part. And then when you're connecting to commercial entities and that, how can we work on making sure that the privacy of our users who are using these platforms through our institutions are not part of something else too. So we've gotten very involved in this space, librarians very involved in this space, because that's been another bedrock that we are trusted, not only in terms of the information we provide, but that we're protecting your right to know.
Great. Yeah, I'm delighted to hear about your thoughts on the subject, because our online activities are such an intimate, part of who we are. And as that, it may not correspond to our intention, so that information has the potential to be possibly abused. I would love to follow up with the second part of the question about the connection between the surveillance and the possibility of censorship, and what should be the role of the library in these ongoing debates that the society is having about censorship of books, and how do we reimagine our digital policy with respect to this issue?
I'm smiling because I am old enough and have been in this profession enough to know when we used to say, let the books battle it out on the shelves. That part of our responsibility is to present within the legal bounds, not pornography, okay, in the legal definition, but people might want to read something that some people think is objectionable. But you have a right to make the decision on your own. And when it also comes to young people, parents and caregivers have a right to, as guardians, to restrict what their own children read. They do not necessarily have the right to determine what other people's children read. And that's the push and pull. When you have public monies involved, taxpayer money, they're looking at your collection development policy. So libraries have had to be very clear in their public review of collection development policies. There are challenges, that's what libraries call them, challenges. And so people can, and it's been for decades, you can challenge a book. And you list the reasons why you think this book shouldn't be at the library. So what's happened more recently, it seems to be, and the American Library Association had its annual conference, first time in person in 2 years. So it was in June, we were all delighted to see each other and everything. However, one of the main topics was this more aggressive form of attempts to censor and control what libraries circulate and purchase, and the increase in state legislative efforts to require, for instance, librarians to go into a children's section or young adult section and mark objectionable books or material in books with a very vague definition of objectionable, so that's it. And about 5 states are moving ahead with that type of legislation. So the conversation at that conference, really, there was this renewed sense of we have to make sure that we safeguard everyone's right to read and their right to know. I think we're going to get t-shirts. We already have the t-shirts that say librarians, the original search engines. We've got those, but the American Library Association has been at the forefront of that. Digital equity is something that we're very concerned about, but also that right to know. So Banned Books Week, we were mentioning before we started, was very lively this year. Bookstores joined in. You'd go into a bookstore and said, here are the banned books. New York Public, I believe, made banned books available through their e-book platform, all of these types of things. So back in the Patriot Act days, we were called feisty fighters for freedom. So now we're back in it.
No, this has been really, really fascinating to hear your thoughts and the ongoing discussions that libraries are having about these complex topics and the connection to our digital policy. So I think this would be a good time to transition into an audience led Q&A session. So I'd like to remind the audience that you have the ability to ask questions to Dr. Hayden through the chat Q&A feature. We actually have quite a few questions that are already in, and maybe I can begin with the first one with a bit of a context that I have been curious to know how libraries are trying to ensure diversity of participation. And in this context, I think there was a great story a few weeks ago about the singer Lizzo, who visited the Library of Congress. And a question on the portal here is, was this part of an effort to connect the library to a broader audience?
Yes, the Library of Congress is joining our colleagues all over the world, really. National libraries are opening up their treasure chests, as we call it, in terms of these collections. And we have, for instance, a grant from the Mellon Foundation called Of the People, where we are having paid internships. And I keep saying paid because in terms of diversity, there are a lot of opportunities for internships, but some groups of students are not able to take unpaid internships. They've got tuition, they've got other things. So being able to have paid internships to have students delve into the library's collections and work with curators and archivists. Another aspect, and this you might be very interested, is working with digital collecting in communities and giving grants out to community digital efforts that are doing different types of projects. And that's been exciting. And then another part is actually adding diverse collections to the Library of Congress's collections. And so that effort of the people that we're reaching out and also making our collections using social media to let people know what they can have access to through our digital front door, as we call it, and to let them know that we have the world's largest collection of a single instrument. Who knew? So many people didn't know, but then you make the connections for people. And then what we found, and we do look at the traffic on our website after that event. What were people looking at? And so what we found were people were saying, oh, Library of Congress, well, what else do they have? What else can they get? Well, they have photographs that are, free and downloadable. Dorothea Lange, Gordon Parks, all of these types of things are there waiting. And you can look at all this material. We have 61 million items online that we've digitized. Well, now more people know about it because we connected to popular culture. And that's another part of being accessible. If they don't know that it exists. It's just sitting there. We say it's a mausoleum.
Yeah, that's great to hear about the Library of Congress, reaching out to a diverse audience. We have quite a few questions on the Q&A, so I'll keep jumping to the next one. This is a two-part question. The first part of which is a bit personal in nature. The question is about your background and connection to libraries growing up. How did you get introduced to libraries and what it gave you in terms of access?
Well, I was very fortunate that I came from a family where reading, even if they weren't reading books, they were reading newspapers, they were reading and reading. And I wanted to learn how to read too, because I could see that was a cool thing to do. And plus I was read to as a young child, fairy tales, things like that. So I associated reading with family and just that enjoyment. And that's very important when you think about literacy efforts. If young people get enjoyment before they learn the act of reading, then they know there's a payoff, and also learning differences. And I was introduced to libraries, and then that was like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff. And so being encouraged, I did learn about library fines because I would keep them a little, but just that being exposed to libraries. And that's why we put so much emphasis in introducing young people who might not have any reading materials in the home, no magazines, newspapers, anything like that, to those early exposures to libraries and what they can be. That's so important.
Great. I think in terms of the joy that you're describing of connecting to interesting content at the library, the second part of the question was about what are some of the materials at the Library of Congress that people are most surprised to encounter?
Well, that we have the papers of 23 presidents, and they're all digitized now. We were able to take advantage of the pandemic, so we digitized the papers of 23 presidents from George Washington to Coolidge, 36 Supreme Court justices, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, and also the largest collection of comic books in the world. We have film, we have sound recordings. I mentioned the photographs that are just truly made the world's first selfie, and you can download that. Young gentleman started that. So many materials, in which you might be surprised to find the library has actual artifacts, like the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated, and Mary Todd Lincoln's Tiffany jewelry, and Charles Dickens' cane. And we have hair, H-A-I-R. So go on the website. We have Thomas Jefferson's hair. We have a whole collection of hair, but all types of things. And when you think about their famous people and people in history like Frederick Douglass, but also people in popular culture, Leonard Bernstein, Ira Gershwin, George and Ira Gershwin, all of those types of things too. So it's that treasure chest. So I encourage you, go on the website, loc.gov, type in something, and I bet you'll find something that you'll be surprised.
Oh, that's really inspiring. I think both for me and our audience to look forward to the next trip to DC and the Library.
Oh, Carl Sagan and Sigmund Freud too.
Oh, very exciting. There are a couple of questions around the broader theme of digital jobs. The first question, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, is how do we make sure that libraries have a leading role in implementing long-term initiatives to prepare today's youth for digital jobs?
Well, one, we have to provide digital jobs in our own institutions. We have to model it, and we also have to model having a workforce that represents the communities that we serve as well. So being able to make sure that we have those opportunities, not just for story time or anything, but those youth ambassadors, the youth volunteers in many communities, young people have to do community service. So we should be having them in our libraries, running the programs, being those young people who assist people on the computers, getting them involved. And those opportunities are things that they learn the skills, they are familiar with the technology, and that puts them in good stead for whatever they might want to do. So being very involved in seeing where our own institutions could be the ground for people learning about and having access. And then we attract, I mentioned we have to have a workforce at that. So we have attracted with our technology efforts, people who are not from the library world, but from the tech world. And one young lady, Kate Swartz, she's started our digital strategy. She's so savvy, and she's working with us to make sure that we have that broader vision of what technology can be, and that if people can buy, she'll tell us, if people can buy a car on their phone, our library app should be pretty darn good. It shouldn't be clunky. It should be, so you need people from the tech world to help and be part of your team.
Oh, very interesting. I think there is a related question here, which is asking how we can scale up these digital skills that you just talked about, but also education in a context that also includes the developing world. I think Africa in particular has been mentioned in the question.
Yeah.
Building upon your experience in terms of the library culture of people.
Well, I mentioned the Mellon Foundation that has been doing great work with those types of projects, and also the IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Service, has been connecting and giving out a lot of grant funding for more investment in connectivity. And then the international, we've been working, the national libraries have been working together as well to make sure that we're part of it. And then there are foundations that are supporting that type of work in developing countries. And we just also, the library community needs to be part of the broader discussions, not just our own institutions, but the broader discussions about so many other issues, because we can be partners in that.
Oh, very, very interesting. This question is continuing the theme of digital skills, but specifically now in the context of the challenges that library might face in attracting and recruiting and retaining library workers with data skills, especially when there might be intense competition for the skills from the corporate world.
And we've encountered that, and I mentioned Kate Swartz, for instance, and people. One advantage we do have is that we are attractive in the fact that we have a lot of projects. And we are open, we're open field for people who are interested in technology. We have another, David Brunton, who came to us from a big tech company because he said, this is interesting. You guys are interesting, and the projects that we have and things like that. So we have that, and we can be the start of someone's tech career too, to not be afraid of having younger tech people come in, and we can be their own research and development aspect. That's how you attract them again. And also the pandemic helped us quite a bit in terms of looking at our telework policies and being more flexible. We have a digital presence, and there are people who could be part of your team who only come physically to your buildings, your library buildings, and some might not ever come, but they can participate in meetings just like this. They can do all kinds of things. And so we have opened up that aspect, and that has really made us more attractive because you're offering people flexibility in their lives. So we have to, think about, what can we offer?
Right.
Salary might not be as good, but freedom and flexibility.
Right. I think since this question focused on a certain type of resource challenge for the library in terms of talent, I'm also wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective about the other types of fiscal challenges that libraries are facing today, and how as a society we can support libraries better.
Well, that's where we work together to get actual funding and funding streams, and being part of like the infrastructure funding that several years ago. Well, there was a big push to include libraries so that we could be equipped to be part of the solution as well, that we are seen as part of an information infrastructure, just like highways. We're the information highway, so we should get funding, because that's one of our biggest challenges in terms of providing digital access. We have to renew the physical. We have to now, with cloud storage issues, all types of things that are in addition to some libraries definitely having to have a physical presence in communities where you're worried about heating and cooling and all of this. But to have the digital aspect too, there's a significant fiscal factor in that. So we're working to make sure that that's part of our budgets, our regular budgets. Of course, grant funding is good to get things going, proof of concept and everything, but you do need to have and say that this is going to be, and it's not going to stop. In fact, it might increase. So we really work a lot on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the stream of questions continues to come in. We have a question about public libraries have provided a greater amount of support to the informal sector and its people in promoting inclusion and equal access. How should policymakers use experience from this to approach digital gender divide, especially for women and girls in the informal sector?
Well, we are the third place in so many communities. We are that safe space, and libraries have been very proactive in offering programming that emphasizes that we are the place for difficult conversations, for all types of people to come together and to get inspiration. And so I think you're going to see even more of that as we claim that in communities. It has brought recently, and this was part of that, those discussions during the conference, increased scrutiny on libraries as being that safe space internationally as well, that we will be the place that people can go, women and girls in particular, about health issues or things that they're concerned about, and all types of gender issues, non-binary, all of these types of things. And that scrutiny from some groups that are saying, well, wait a minute, you guys are, just fill in the blank. Fill in the blank of that we are promoting different things. We're not. We're providing more access to everyone.
Great. I think that might cover all of the questions that have been asked so far. I encourage the attendees to use this as a last opportunity. And I think in the meantime, Tithi has a question for you as well. So Tithi, please go ahead.
Yeah. I was actually curious about, I know you've done some work on this, as we sort of think about digitization and moving all of these things to the digital world. I know you've done some work around people with disabilities, particularly visual disabilities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that as we move into this sort of digitization world? Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest efforts has been at the Library of Congress for a number of years, the National Library for the Blind, and now change it to print disabled. And with the Marrakesh Treaty that was signed several years ago, we also are able to make foreign language materials available and worked on the copyright types of things. So there are language issues, and the NLS, it's called, their motto is very simple, that all may read. And so the legislation, enabling legislation, has now been revised to include people with learning differences. So that's people with dyslexia and even cognitive other issues. And so you are able to expand who can have access to different materials, and then using technology with e-readers. Part of what we did during strategic planning this boarding, some people are visual learners, some people are oral learners, all types of things, so that you provide the content in different formats and accessibility. So that's been a really exciting effort, and even electronic Braille readers too, and thinking about audio and how you can do that, people who are deaf, all of those things. So we're really excited about that effort. And we have centers in each state. So we work with public libraries to provide those services.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Hayden, for this,
thank
this
you.
fascinating and inspiring conversation. We're very grateful that you took time for this panel discussion today. And Titi and I can't wait to one day meet you in person on
Oh yes, and I want to invite everybody that's tuned in too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.